Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Beginner Imaging Workshop. I'm Naveen Malik, and I didn't have an agenda today. I am sharing screen with a presentation that I could walk through. That's a kind of a cobbling together of a couple other presentations I've done. Before I do that, just you know, anytime you have questions, please interrupt. I'm here to just have. I'd rather have a conversation about imaging and approaches I've taken, like, and I'll point out I'm not an expert on anything or everything at all. Like I've not shot with any Newtonians other than playing around with the Dobsonian about a year ago. Um, I've used two scopes now that I've gone through DSLRs. I've used my phone, cooled astrophotography cameras, dabbled a little bit with a planetary camera, but I've only used that as a like as a sky cam. So I personally might not be able to answer everything, but there's other people in the group, so feel free to ask away. So before I bore everybody with slides, is there any questions or areas of interest from folks who are here today?
Well, I'm a total newbie,
Okay.
so um, I'm interested in starting from square one. Learn to crawl before you walk. So anytime you get a chance to slip in that kind of information, I'm listening.
Okay. I had the presentation would cover basically my initial learning and steps and things that I've picked up. So I can do that. Oh, I see something in chat. Be right back. Okay, Chris. Um,
Are you
Anybody
planning on
else?
focusing on imaging or processing or both?
I can hit both.
Okay.
All right. Well, let me go through the deck, and it may go through some of the slides pretty fast. This deck is too long for the workshop, but because it's kind of a amalgamation of multiple things. But so I mentioned the Dobsonian taking pictures. So my kids got a telescope in right before Christmas in 2019, which was fortuitous timing. So we took it out in the front. That's my youngest taking a look through it. I just had him pose, I think. And we were looking at, of course, the conjunction, Jupiter and Saturn. And that's what got me hooked because through the eyepiece, and this is a shot with my cell phone, very carefully trying to hold it up to the eyepiece and capture something of Jupiter, and you can see three of the moons and Saturn on towards the bottom left here. Doesn't do it any justice. It looks way better through the eyepiece, but this is what got me started into astrophotography. So I had one scope, the Dobsonian, tried using afocal with the camera, didn't work really great. So I printed some phone adapters. The one on the left, I take the approach of like, let me try what I can with what I have already before I go spend a lot of money because I wanted to do better, but I didn't know what I needed. So trying what I already have gives me, my head is a way to slow me down. So I have a 3D printer, so I printed a couple things. This one on the left is really adjustable. You could throw any phone in there. It is really fiddly. I don't know if you have tried to put a cell phone on a generic adapter onto an eyepiece, but if you don't get it just right, it is wrong. You get tilt. You get yeah, all sorts of problems. So I decided I was going to design my own. So that's the one on the right. I have a Pixel 4. So if you happen to have a Pixel 4, I've got a 3D model for a pretty good phone case. I don't think I have a picture with it with the phone in it, but it got the camera like I took out calipers and measuring everything, gets the camera like centered on the eyepiece. There's an adjustment so you can, move it up and down and slight adjustments sideways if it's not quite right. But so I was able to get something, which was really cool. Orion thankfully was up and visible when I was starting out. Um, but I wanted to get more. So this on the right is a picture I finished sometime in the fall with a telescope and cooled camera. Mark, could you mute?
Sorry,
Thanks. So
I don't know how to mute. Oh, I can mute.
okay. So just to run through like kind of the process you're going through when you're taking pictures. So the aperture of, so just changing gears a bit. So from I want more better pictures to, well, what does that mean? How do I get pictures, period? So there's two things when you're looking at lenses, which, or telescopes, is the aperture and the focal length. And the aperture, there's a really good analogy somewhere. I probably have the link somewhere, but think about it like you have a sprinkler on in your front yard. The aperture is the width. So how much water or light you're going to be collecting over a period of time goes up as you increase that aperture, the literally how wide your lens is. And then the focal length is, I guess the water analogy doesn't hold quite as well for this, but it's about how much magnification you're going to get. And the combination of those give you you'll hear speed, or what is the term? Blanking on the term, the F ratio, whatever that's called. And then it's a matter of how much time do you need to get enough data collected to have a good picture in the end. So there's a rule if you're starting out. Again, if my approach was I'm going to start out with nothing. At one point I had a phone, and I have done it since still. Put the phone on the roof of my car because I could angle it and just push the button and walk away for a bit and let the Pixel has some astrophotography mode, which I've had mixed results with, but you could use car. I mentioned in the workshop invite, a bag of rice or beans, something to hold camera stable. Tripod, of course, if you have it. And then it's a question of how long of an exposure you can take. And there's you can hear I've heard of the 500 rule. Take 500 divided by your focal length, and that's how many seconds you should be able to expose. Really, it's a little more complicated than that. It depends on where you're pointing at in the sky. If you're pointing at the North Pole, the North Celestial Pole, you could take probably a longer exposure because things aren't moving quite as fast. Whereas if you're pointing at declination 0, so like as far from the poles as you can be, you're going to need shorter exposures. So Orion, I think, is declination -5 degrees, something like that. So it's pretty much as the worst case scenario as far as like how fast the stars are moving across the night sky.
So that
And
formula is for untracked. So what you're saying.
right. Yeah,
Okay.
untracked. So remember, I started off with nothing, and so my approach was let me learn what I can do without having to going out and buying anything. So untracked. Thank you. I was using a Canon DSLR, so at 15 millimeters, it was something like 12 seconds exposure. At 300 millimeters, it's in theory, according to the math, 0.8 seconds. And then with the Dobsonian, which is 1200 millimeters, it's a 8-inch f6, 0.2 of a second. So not very long exposures. So I played around with this. I went out to Harris Lake and took some shots of Orion rising over the lake, which was pretty cool. And it's probably pretty dark in the presentation, but um, it was fun to play with. As a part of doing this type of stuff too, I'm starting to learn about the processing, which I'll get into in a little bit as well. And just as you mentioned, untracked. So this is the difference, 30 seconds, tracked versus untracked at 300 millimeters. Now it's really wobbly on the right. This isn't with a mount. I built a barn door tracker, which I'll talk about as well. But this was the problem I was trying to solve, is that when you're not tracking, everything's moving, and it's moving pretty fast as you quote zoom in or increase your focal length. So I wanted to solve that problem. And you can buy if you're looking at getting into this and you have a lightweight rig, like you have a camera with a lens, there are star trackers that you can purchase. Not sure how available they are. Going to assume not very available because everything is on back order. But I had a 3D printer and decided I wanted to build one. Let's see. So I don't remember why I stuck this one in here, but so the reason we need to do this is because the Earth is rotating, and therefore it looks like the stars are moving. So you basically have to compensate for that, and that's what a tracker would do. So this little blue line out of the cone represents your device pointed at the north celestial pole in this example, and then the cone is the basically how you need to rotate it. So if it depends on where you are on the Earth changes that cone. So the angle at which you have to rotate. So as I mentioned, I built a barn door tracker. There's a lot of different styles. I won't go into all of them here. Take a look at Wikipedia article. This is where I got the image. They have a good breakdown of what they are. I did a prototype that was literally a 2x4 with a very cheap hinge here on the end. This blue bit of pool noodle was there because I had another bolt sticking out that I didn't want to hit anything on. Threaded rod with a ball camera mount that I got on Amazon. This is the ball camera mount is the most expensive thing on my barn door tracker rig. It's like half the price of everything. Had
Naveen?
a
Yeah, so so you make that right there. About how much would you say the whole setup is, and minus the camera, but including the tripod?
The tripod I spent I think $100 on. The ball thingy for the camera was like 25, $26 on Amazon. The wood I just had laying around, and a couple dollars for the hardware, I guess. I didn't price this one out. I did price out the 3D printed one, which came out to $56 and change total.
Okay, very good.
56 if I had done it right the first time. So there was a little bit of trial and error.
Yeah, it's a learning experience. Well, one thing I'll add to everybody, you probably already said this because I stepped away. Only keep all the equipment you get because it could be used for other things later. Only get rid of it if you absolutely know that you're never going to use it again in this hobby. Because like the tripod there, I bought one of those like way earlier on and I still use it. So when I say early on, I think I bought it back in 2009 and I still have it.
Yeah, I mean, it's useful for throwing a camera on. My wife has used it for some stuff. She doesn't do astrophotography. She does terrestrial photography, I guess you would say. So yeah, definitely useful. And the barn door tracker, which is here, I still have. It's sitting in front of me on the desk. So I don't know if folks wanted to take a look at it or talk about what it does. I put basically skateboard bearings in it for the hinge. I've got a Raspberry Pi Pico hooked up to it to drive a very small stepper motor. And I spent gobs of time figuring out how to write that thing the right way so that it actually was reliable in how it was uh, telling that motor to move, because the timing is really important. I've got yeah, you can see here there's a red dot finder on the end, because I tried. There's other ways you can do like polar alignment. So you want to point at Polaris so you're roughly polar aligned. I tried. There was a method to put a straw on the end or a tube and look through that, and I never could get that thing to work in a satisfactory way. So I put the red dot finder. I actually just took it off the Dobsonian and put it on this guy, and that worked pretty well. The image of Orion on the right is one I took in February of last year, and I mean, there's problems with it, obviously, halos and chromatic aberration, meaning just issues with color, but I was really happy, still happy. I mean, this was I think a pretty good result for a do-it-yourself tracker with a DSLR at 300 millimeters, which I know now is probably too much. Okay, so we're asking about processing, and I'm going to get into that a little bit. Just kind of the principles of how it works, and what you're doing in broad strokes. There's a lot that goes into this in practice, but so stacking's or integrations where you take the exposures from a bunch of different pictures and smash them together. What you end up with is better signal to noise ratio. So you want more signal and less noise. Every image you take is going to have some level of noise. There's noise introduced from your camera. There's also imperfections in the data you're collecting, because you're taking pictures through an atmosphere. Depending on where you're shooting, could be more or less atmosphere. You've got light pollution and all sorts of other things that factor in. Satellites and space stations and airplanes and clouds. So this is an example of a single 5-second exposure with the Canon. So this is back from February last year. And then almost 600 4-second exposures, because I found with the barn door tracker 4 seconds was about as far as I could push it. And you can see the color looks better. You can't really see much by the way of the nebula, but the background is less noisy, it's less grainy, less splotchy purpley green colors. So that's like the first step, is getting a good image to work from, your good master light image. And you do that by, well, you have your lights. This is showing that the purple, I guess, I can't remember, I guess that's the light pollution. I don't think I had a filter in. You take darks, ideally, so put the cap on the lens, make sure it's in a dark place, and take exposures with that, with it capped and closed off from any light leaks that match whatever exposure you were taking. So this is the 4-second dark, probably the master. I can't remember now. I made this presentation a while ago.
I mean, Naveen, can I add just one thing?
Sure.
Arts? Yeah. So one thing I would mention is that it's like you're saying that it's built to remove or it's not built. Darks are taken, just to remove almost anything from that's caused by the camera. So, but based on that, you don't actually have to do your darks right then and there in the field. You can just go out, take your pictures, and you can bring it inside if you want and do your darks, or you can, take a picture, bring it inside and do your darks like a month later or whatever. Without getting into too much detail, we can talk about it, I guess, way later on in emails or whatever. But another important factor is temperature because noise can vary at temperature. But anyway, yeah, don't pay attention to that part just yet. Just know that darks can be taken at any time. So,
Yep. Thanks,
well,
Chris. Yeah, a lot of people will build, we call them dark libraries. So you do your darks once or periodically and just reuse them. Especially with the cooled cameras, a little bit harder with the uncooled camera, but still possible.
So what's the purpose for the darks?
The darks are subtracting out any noise that's generated as a part of taking the image by the camera itself.
So that's
So-
part of your computer program.
Right, when you do when you
software
take all
program.
your images, your light images that you took of whatever your target was, and you include the darks in the stacking software, something like Deep Sky Stacker or Cyril, or those are two free ones. It will use that dark to remove the camera noise.
Yeah, Naveen, you also have, it can have bad pixels that are taken out by the darks. You can have something called amp glow from the camera that it can be taken out by the darks, that sort of thing. So
Yep.
As you get more sophisticated, you start noticing these things. When you're starting out, not so much maybe, but the problem with darks is that the time that you have needs to be roughly the same as the exposure time for your lights. And so that's why you may not want to do it on the same night that you're doing the lights, because if you're taking, down the road, you're taking 5-minute exposures, you're going to use a lot of time taking those if you're doing it at the same time you're taking the lights. So you have to leave yourself a lot of time, which is not necessarily what you want to do if it's middle of the night.
Yep.
So
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I don't know if it comes through on the share, but I don't see any really hot pickles on this, but you can see some column structures, and then there's a faint line on this right side. It got worse. There was like 3 rows of pixels on this sensor that started to give up. Went over by the end of my using it like halfway across the sensor. So that was something I haven't told my wife yet. And then flats, this one's hard to show. I should have switched out with something I've gotten with my new setup. But flats are a frame you take to correct for vignetting in your optics, meaning curvature, fall off of light. So in this, hopefully it's coming through enough. The center is brighter and the edges taper off in brightness. Maybe I should pull up another.
Is that a t-shirt flat?
No, I have a tracing tablet, which I.
Okay, I just wondered because on Zoom it looks like a fabric pattern. I didn't know if that was artifact of Zoom or.
Yeah, I think that's probably the sensor showing. Let me pull up while I'm talking. I'm gonna try to pull up something in PixInsight, which will have a better representation here. But anyway, so you've got vignetting and dust. Those are 2 things you want to get out. And actually, yeah, this flat will probably show dust. There we go. That's a good one. Sorry, I'm pulling over. So this is from my current setup. You can see the bright center, especially up in the top left, it gets a lot darker. We've got all these dust donuts, blobs all over the place, which when I saw this was annoying. I've cleaned it since.
Are those are those on the sensor or on optics?
Most of these were on the filters. I've got a filter wheel, though this one in the top right wasn't on a filter. So I have some other problems. So I cracked it open today and I just dusted it off again with a simple, like what do they call it? A rocket duster. So you just a handheld bulb that shoots air out. So hopefully I got that one. If not, try again. But it's okay because this frame is used to calibrate the imperfections out of the light frames that you've taken. Okay.
Do you do flats for every session, or?
I do. If you don't change your imaging train, meaning you don't rotate your camera or any components of the system, and you don't open anything up so that you could introduce new dust, you'd probably be okay with reusing flats. I have in the past because I screwed up taking flats a couple times. So I'm like, well, it's close enough to the previous night that it worked. But yeah, I just have a routine to do it every night.
Right, and flats don't take very long to take once you know what exposure. So you can
Yeah.
take a lot of flats in a very short time. And so it's typically best to do it when you're, if you've done your lights, just take the flats before you rotate to go to another target, before you move the telescope out or anything, take some more flats. It doesn't take very long.
Yep.
Yeah, if you have a panel, though.
Well, that's true.
Well, one thing that I find useful that a lot of people have, and or if you don't have it, there's very cheap alternatives to them. Is a tablet computer. I guess that's what you're referring to, Naveen.
I have a tracing tablet actually.
Yeah,
that I bought,
So
yeah.
I used to use one of those too, but I gave it to a laboratory that I just left because we used it for other things. Before I had that, and then afterwards I got an iPad, which was less bulky, it was lighter, so that's what I used. I just took a picture of something white. Is all I did, and and because it may be bright on the iPad, but again, this is your camera that's lowering the exposure for it, so you can use something like that. And if you don't feel like going out and buying an iPad, they have these like simple Android tablets out there. I know that are, God, probably $100 or less out there, and you just use one of those. I mean, the whole point is just making sure that whatever aperture, or for those who don't really understand what aperture is, how big around your telescope is, make sure that whatever you use in front of it is as big around as what you want to use the flats for. So if you have like an iPad mini and you have something that's like a Newtonian that's like 8 inches in diameter, that's obviously probably not going to work very well. So I would need a full-size iPad to do something like that. So anyway, I digress. That's just based on my.
Yeah, I have an iPad. I just never thought of using it as a panel. I guess if you just have like a white image on it or something.
Yeah.
You can do a search for white on the web. You can find white images that are pure white that you can just download and use that.
Yeah. So I mean, actually my smallest, I showed it to you earlier. The smallest camera lens, it's an 85 millimeter camera lens. It's small enough that I can just use my Android phone. So I just put that over it, and it does the trick. I mean, yeah.
Yep. And one thing to keep in mind too is the tablet, depending on your setup and what you're doing, could be used to control something like an ASI Air or give a remote into a PC.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. It never crossed my mind to
yeah.
take that iPad and use it as my light panel.
I've also heard of people using laptop screens, which I haven't tried. I have the panel set up for my gear already, and it works well. But that's another option. One thing
I just bought one of the panels that that you use, Naveen, and it was like $19. So it's
yeah,
a,
yeah,
it's a good cheap
it's a good.
solution.
It is, and it dims really well. I did have to use some sheets of paper to get it dim enough for the broadband filters. But it works well enough. I do 3 sheets of paper right now, dim for LRGB, and then I keep the same 3 sheets of paper and bright for narrowband. And unfortunately, it would be good if I could take those sheets of paper off for the narrowband, because I end up taking like 9 minutes to do all 3 filters. But my S2 exposures are like 11.5 seconds each. So, but it is what it is. It's automated, and I start it well before true night, so not a big deal. Okay, onward. So yeah, okay, so you've got your lights, you've got your calibration frames, meaning your darks and your flats. There's also another one called bias, which I don't talk about. Do we want to talk about that? Anybody interested? I don't use bias.
Yes, please, could you?
All right.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, bias is taken in the same way that you take a dark, in that it's closed off from any light sources, and it is the shortest exposure possible for your camera. And what you're capturing is the noise generated by the camera by reading the data off the sensor. So it's the read noise. Darks are capturing the noise generated by the camera while taking an exposure. Plus, because you're reading the data off, the read noise. So darks are, they include the bias. Now, what you can do is, if you use bias, you can scale your darks, meaning if I took, if I'm doing, let's say 1 minute exposures, my flats are 3 seconds. I could do darks for 1 minute and cover my lights, and then I could do darks for 3 seconds to cover my flats, or I can have bias to scale the darks down to 3 seconds. Why do we need to do that? There's videos out there. Adam Block did a great series on the weighted batch pre-processing component in PixInsight, but it's worth watching if you don't use PixInsight or don't want to, because he gets into how all of these things fit together in the math. So very informative, very good series, for at least the first several episodes before it gets into the specifics of the software.
And those are free too on YouTube.
Yeah,
I agree, they're excellent.
So you take your darks, which include your bias, and you subtract the bias out. So now you have just the noise from the sensor while collecting data. So now you can scale that down to 3 seconds. And then you add the bias back in. So now you have 3 seconds plus the bias, meaning the read noise, and you subtract that out of your flats. Now I've built dark libraries for the lights I take and for my flats. So I don't do that math. I just skip biases completely, and I just have darks that match every exposure I'm going to take. But there's options.
Thing I like about biases, they're so easy to do in there.
There
You
are
can do 50 of them in a second or whatever.
Yeah, when I did start off taking bias, and I would take the camera, go into my closet, and just hold the button down for a while, just clicking away, get up to like, they're cheap too, so you like get 100 or whatever really fast. Okay. So you've taken our lights, we've calibrated out all the noise, we've corrected for vignetting and dust. Oh, got a question in chat. What process do you follow to first acquire the object? How to manage gain, contrast, etc. Okay. So by acquire an object, do you mean point your optics at the thing you want to take a picture of?
No, it's more of, it's there, but you can't see it yet. So how do you get it to appear in the camera, right? Because when you first pointed at the object, nothing's there.
Well, so there's some, depending on what you do, there's times when you won't see the object at all in your whatever camera, no matter how long of an exposure you take. Well, I mean, there's at some point probably would matter. Some things have really faint signals. So if it's a framing question, it's look at the stars. And then trust that if you collect enough light images, you will eventually see something when you do the stacking.
Okay. Because we're struggling with like the gain. What should the gain be at?
Okay.
There's infinite like combinations, right?
Yeah, so gain for cooled cameras or astrophotography cameras, and then ISO, which is pretty much the same thing for DSLRs.
What are you talking about, Robin?
When we're setting it up and we pointed at the object, we're having a hard time getting it to appear in sharp caps so that we can stack it. And we're fiddling with the contrast and with the gain and all that kind of stuff, but we're just having a hard time getting it to really come out.
What kind of camera?
It's a Meade LX200 and a Zoe camera.
The CMOS camera. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, with Sharp Cap, you can do sensor analysis and it'll tell you the optimal gain for your sensor.
Okay.
It's,
I did do
but
that.
it's I've also read that that's free, so you don't need to own Sharp Cap, have a license to be able to use that. Do it. 100%. Like if you don't like, even for a DSLR as well, it can be a pain to figure out what like photons to photons, which has really good data, but it can be a pain to figure out what's the optimal ISO to use for the DSLR I have. So do the sensor analysis, spend the time on it. It takes a little while. You'll need a bright light source. So if you have a flat panel or the tracing tablet is what I used, that's useful. But it'll tell you the optimal gain. If you have a astrophotography camera, the manufacturers will tell you where you have unity gain or the best gain for that camera. But your sensor may be a little bit different.
Does that for all their cameras, don't they? They have the graph, and it's
they do a good job with that. I have an ASI 50 or 533 MC that Sharp Cap. So ZWO says the best gain, their unity gain for that camera is 100. When I did the Sharp Cap analysis, it told me 101. So I use 101. So for what it's worth, I mean, it was slightly different than the published general guide.
Yeah, I did it. It came out at like 150 or something, right around there.
Yeah, and that's one thing to keep in mind with gains and ISOs. Like every camera has different settings you want to use. So my ISO for my Canon was 200. That was the best, or maybe 100. But I've seen other people have asked questions about what ISO should I pick for my DSLR, and I've looked it up in Photons to Photons website, which is a good resource. And some of them, the ideal is somewhere 400 or 1600 ISO. So it
Okay.
varies.
Some of the newer sensors are what they call ISO invariant,
Hmm.
like the Sony A7, which I think is the same chip that's in the 2600 cameras, the ZWO.
Okay. Oh, and also keep in mind
No, the 2400, sorry.
20, the ideal gain on paper may not be the best gain for what you're doing. I shoot my broadband images with a gain of 0. But the ideal, like the unity gain for my camera is, I think it's 100 with the 2600. And why do I do that? I do that because I want to do longer exposures without saturating stars as badly, because I don't want to use up all my hard drive space. I think my ideal exposure time for red is something like 15 seconds. It's ridiculous. So if I go to gain 0, I can do, oh, this is with the Zenith Star 73. We go from 15 seconds at gain 100 to 90 seconds at gain 0.
Where are you getting those numbers for, like with the ideal? That's something I've been
Oh,
wondering.
okay. So I use SharpCap to do the sensor analysis, and then in Nina, I use the optimal exposure calculator. If you are a user of the beta for Nina, it has moved into a plugin. So they have a new plugin architecture, and they're starting to move some of the non-core functionality out. But you basically say, take a picture for so many seconds with whatever filter, tell it where the sensor, what the sensor analysis was, what gain or ISO you want to take the image at, and you take a bias. So it'll prompt you. There's a button you say, take a bias, click the button, and it'll say, okay, cap your scope or lens. And it'll take one bias to get the read noise, and then it'll do an exposure. I do 5 or 15 seconds depending on what I feel like doing. It doesn't seem to matter much.
Naveen, can I hijack the discussion just for a moment?
Yep.
So you talk about gain right there. So that's another thing that'll get subtracted out from dark frames, because obviously when you jack up the gain, you're going to jack up everything, including the noise as well. So it is useful, but again, darks are going to remove such things. And so what I was getting at as far as hijacking, can I share my screen just for a second?
Sure thing.
So, all right, let me get this right.
And while Chris is sharing, I realized I can bring up the software I use if folks want to see it while we're talking about it.
So this was back, let's see, right there, it says it right there. This is back in 2010. This is Comet Hartley. And if it moves fast enough when it comes to photographing comets, I'll usually do a time lapse just to show it going across the frame. But usually I just use the raw frames for it. So the frames still have noise and everything like that. But what I'm getting at is right here. This was the finished product. Okay, I mean it's not as spectacular as ones that would have like these real long dynamic tails to it, but it was a nice comet to take to image, and but it did move fast. So I went ahead and did a time lapse of it. I'm not going to show that, but what I have here, just with the discussion of dark subtracting and how gain can be, the noise that gets amplified by gain can be removed by darks. If you look at this guy, this has been completely calibrated. Everything's been stacked, and noise has been averaged out, but any noise that was left behind when you were stacking did get removed from the dark that you made. And so that's what the final image looks like. Now, this right here, zoom out a little bit. This was one of the frames, one of the original RAWs from that stack. Okay, it's been cropped here. That's why you see all the little ant frame going around the edge there. But if you look at this pixel right here, or this group of pixels actually, when you look at these guys, well, you can tell that these are tiny, very contrasty, which means that these are what we'll term as hot pixels, okay? Which means these aren't stars, these are actual noise coming from the camera. So if you were to look at this frame and combine it or and compare it to this one, the stuff that I just threw together, I don't know if it would help or not. That's the cleanup right there. Let's see. So is it F7? Yeah, there it is. Okay, so this is the cleaned up frame. Get that in first. Okay, so there's your cleaned up frame, and then this is the individual frame that came from it. Okay, so you see these pixels right here. All right, even though the stars are a little bloated in this one, you can see that those pixels are gone, and that the reason why they're gone is because I took darks. So darks do help. It almost looks like I'm out of focus in the final image, but anyway, yeah, there was one there, there was one there, there was one there. I took darks, and they're gone. So that's just a demonstration of the advantage of taking darks. So, thanks, Naveen.
Thanks, Chris. All right. Get my share back up. Okay. Onward. So you got your final stack. Oh, make sure my mic, everybody can hear me. I turn my mic back on.
Yep.
Okay. So you have your final stack, which is your single master light image that's been calibrated and adjusted for your noise and vignetting and dust. But then you get into the world of post-processing, which can drive you mad. But anyway, this is the result. So conversion from that, faint nebulosity and just bright stars to changing it, stretching it with, I think I did this one in GIMP, which is a free open source software. And you end up with your final result. Post-processing is also very personal, so you can do whatever you want. It's art. I've seen some very interesting stuff, and I've done some very interesting stuff just because I could. I would say there's no right or wrong. There's just what you like. So if there's something you're trying to accomplish that you can't accomplish, or you just want ideas on how, of course, ask. But if it makes you happy, good job. So okay, barn door tracker again. I'm pretty proud of this device. I showed this already, but it's about 40 minutes of data from my front yard or side yard to try and dodge the street lights. February of last year, and taking 4-second subs. And then I tried flame and horsehead, 5-second subs. I think I realized with this that it was pushing it a little bit, but still, 51 minutes from the side yard with the barn door tracker, and then just a stock Canon DSLR. I also tried some other stuff that were more hydrogen alpha only. So the red here with horsehead is hydrogen alpha. And this camera doesn't respond very well to it. So your mileage may vary. I've seen some camera sensors where there's filters that manufacturers put in to block ultraviolet and UV, and it cuts into the red most often, pretty often, sometimes enough to cut out hydrogen alpha, which is one of those that we like for our deep sky pictures. Let's see, I can't remember what I put in here. Oh, I can get into, okay. What do we want to get into now? I can talk math, I can talk gear
Guiding.
selection, huh?
Guiding, that item 3
Guiding.
on there is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I mean, like I've been wondering if I got the right guide sensor size for, to go with the focal length and the main camera sensor size.
Okay, so yeah, that's what this formula is basically trying to figure out suitability between your imaging and guiding setup. I don't know if it's really, I mean, there's some level of suitability. I think it's, I can't remember the math. I mean, the link is here. I can break out of this and let me put this in chat if anybody wants to go read up on this. The thing, the biggest thing for me now when I'm looking at the guiding setup versus imaging setup is making sure that I understand how many pixels I need to dither. So, because you got to keep in mind your well, at least for my setup, my guiding camera's pixels are a different size than the imaging camera pixels. And what you see in a tools like PhD2 and whatever, I don't know what the ASI or guiding thing is called, but whatever you see there is.
I think it's a variant of the PhD too.
Okay. What you're seeing is if you're looking at the guiding error by pixels, it's the guide camera pixel. And if your focal length of your imaging rig and your guiding rig is different, then you have further math to factor in. I'm using an off-axis guider, so my focal length for both is the same. But I think I did the math on this earlier this week for my setup. I think it's for my imaging pixels are 3.76 nanometers, I think. And I can't remember what the guiding one is, but it's like a factor of 1.4 different. So I just factor that in when I say how many pixels I want to dither. And dithering is where whenever you decide you want to trigger it, your sequence will move your setup a certain amount, random directions or in a spiral, depending on or whatever configuration options you have in your software. It'll move it so those hot pixels that Chris was talking about and showing us earlier move around in the image you're gonna, like all the pictures you're gonna later stack, because then it's the algorithms that do pixel rejection can do a better job if they don't all stack up in the same spot. So if you have really good guiding and you don't dither, all of your hot pixels will be in one spot, and if they're not taken out by your darks, they'll survive stacking and you'll have artifacts. So dither, please.
How often do you dither? Because I know, I one of the downsides of dithering is that it has to wait for it to settle, and then it just adds more time to the sequence.
Yep, I dither. If I'm doing narrowband, I'm taking 10-minute exposures. I dither after every picture. If I'm doing broadband, I typically am doing RGB in order. Well, whatever order makes the most sense for reasons I don't want to get into in this workshop. I think I take one image for each filter and then dither. So that would be 5-minute exposures once every 15 minutes then. If I were to do like one broadband filter, like I need to go back to Orion Nebula and get some more blue because of user error in setting up a sequence last week. I got like 4 times more green than I did red, and 2 blue pictures. It's not enough. if I do just blue, I would probably dither every 2 pictures, every 2, which is 5-minute sub, so every 10 minutes. My settle time though is pretty good. I think I have Nina set up to have a minimum settle time of at least 5 seconds or something. I don't, because I was seeing some problems, but it's generally pretty good. If you're not sure, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Just do some dithering in there. The more data you're collecting, the less it'll matter. But then, you know, if you check your data, like assuming you're doing a multiple nights, you'd have an opportunity to adjust it. But do a stack and see what kind of artifacts show up if you're not sure.
How many pixels do you dither as a rule of thumb for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I write everything down. Let me go look. I think it's 6, 5 or 6 is my rule of thumb. 5 or 6 imaging camera pixels. Let's see here. Oh, 4 or 5 is what I have written down. So right now okay, so the difference between my two right now is wrong. It's a factor of 1.29 guide pixels per 1 imaging pixel. So I'm looking at, I could show my notes. I have a gigantic document with all the things. And so according to this, with the 2600 mm Pro versus the ASI 290 mm with the off-axis guider, difference is 1.29 to 1. So I go to 6 pixels rounded up to get at 4 or 5.
So dither in guide pixels or in imaging?
Yes, it's in guide pixels. So I might have that wrong now that you say that, but it's been working. I've stacked some stuff and verified it seems to work all right. Something I'll just throw out there is a lot of people getting new and entering into imaging seem to confuse dithering and drizzling. Drizzling is a processing technique, has nothing to do with dithering. If I can talk about it if folks are interested, but yeah, it seems to come up often in forums that I'm a part
I
of.
understand the dither. Drizzle is something I haven't understood.
Drizzle, you basically take a pixel and cut it up into smaller pixels. You take your raw image pixels, cut them up, and then stack with those smaller pixels. Because, well, assuming that you're dithering, meaning moving the frame periodically, what you end up with is the potential to extract more detail, I guess, because you know, one raw frame won't line up 100 like 1-to-1 with another raw, so they're offset a little bit. And if you have more pixels that you're dealing with in the stacking, you could get more details. I've used it for like I've run in pretty short focal length, so I've used it with some Galaxy processing, and it seemed to get me better results. Though it takes a lot longer to do, and I've found some other processing techniques don't do well with drizzled data. So there's trade-offs.
Okay, thanks. That gives me a better idea.
Can you talk about your software that you recommend using for both capturing and stacking?
Sure. So I started off using Deep Sky Stacker, and it does a good job. I've played with Cyril there, and there's some RAC presentations on Cyril from sometime last year.
How do you spell that?
Siril.
Okay.
Both of those are free. I think Cyril might have some processing stuff in it too, but I really haven't used it enough to know. I am using PixInsight, which is not free. So if you're getting into imaging and whatnot, I don't recommend jumping into PixInsight because it's got a extremely steep learning curve. I tried it back February of last year. They have the trial you can use? I don't think I learned anything while using it for the trial. I had to buy it and actually spend the time running through tutorials and whatever to really put my head around it. But I also was dealing with the barn door tracker data in the trial, which was not the best data in the world.
I mean, there's also AstroPixel processor.
Yes, Astral Pixel Processor, APP. I've seen really good output from that. I've not used it, but yeah, absolutely. Steve, have you used that before?
And I've used it off and on for combining RGB and HASO kind of things, because it has lots of nice sliders and things like that you can play with if you have such an image. And it's relatively easy to use. It does not do all of what PixInsight does. So I would say it's slightly simpler to learn. The interface is a little glitchy, I think, and kind of hard to figure out. But once you do, it takes you through step by step relatively easily. So it's not free, but I don't think it's as expensive as PixInsight. So
yeah,
it's something to look at anyway.
Yeah, APP I've heard really good for combining data with different pixel scales. I think is what I would like. I haven't done that yet, but like that's where my brain goes when I think what would I use APP.
Yeah.
What else? Affinity Photo is your Photoshop alternative. I guess it's pretty cheap. I bought it on sale. They do sales periodically, I think for $25. I use it for all sorts of random photo editing anymore. It's great. I used GIMP initially for processing. GIMP works. I don't know that I would really recommend it though. It's just a little bit difficult to do. Photoshop, of course, is an option for processing. But I've enjoyed Affinity Photo. What else? Okay, so that's stacking, and that's some of the post-processing options. There's, I'm sure, more out there, but those seem to be the popular ones. For running, oh, go ahead.
And when you're capturing the original image, I've got a next image from Celestron, and I'm just starting out to find my way with that. And it does have one that's recommended, but I had problems with it. And then I talked to Celestron's support group, and they said that wasn't a very good selection. So the image capture is a question mark then.
I am a Nina fanboy, if you will. I've been using Nina since I discovered it, and I love it. It can't do quite everything I want, but it does almost everything I want for capture.
You're doing a Canon or Nikon camera. There's Backyard EOS and Backyard Nikon, which are very nice for those cameras. There's Sequence Generator Pro, which is what I use. Nina, of course. Voyager, I think, is another one.
Voyager's one I've started looking at. So I was wondering about doing sky flats and automating it, and Voyager's the one that came up. And I know there's other club members that use it.
sharp cap.
Sharp cap.
mentioned.
Yeah.
Then if you're doing planetary or lunar or solar, then there's fire capture, which
Yep.
is the I would use for those. So it really all depends partly on what you're going to be shooting.
Yeah, I think next image is only appropriate for the moon and planets. I don't think it gets into deep sky very well.
Hmm.
So it's a fairly inexpensive CCD, right? You know,
Which
For
camera?
which?
the next image from Celestron.
That one. That's, I would probably use fire capture with that. I think that fire supports that. And if it's free.
Okay.
Fire
Right.
capture takes a little bit of poking around at, I think, to get used to it and understand how it works, but it's 100% worth it. I think it's been, once I figured out how to make it work, or what I was doing wrong, it's worked really well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so there's a lot of options out there. Several free ones. As you mentioned, some of the manufacturers have software. I know ZWO has some software, I think, too, which I've never even installed it to look at it, so I don't know. So Nina, Sequence Generator Pro, and Voyager are probably the top of my stack for things I would consider. I haven't actually used SGP, Sequence Generator Pro or Voyager. But
has to do with Nina. It's very good if you're going to just leave your scope out all night and want to program it to do and tell it what to do while you sleep. If you're like me, you stay up all night, then I don't need something like that, and I'm used to Sequence Generator Pro, so that's what I use.
okay.
It kind of depends on your local situation.
Yeah, I do set mine up and go to sleep, so.
Yeah, I can't leave my scope out by the street all night long without keeping an eye on it, so I stay up all night.
Yeah. Okay, any other software? Oh, and then there's not one, we're throwing out a bunch of things. There's not one tool that does everything really, really well. For example, I've gone back to using SharpCap for doing polar alignment, but then I use Nina for the actual data acquisition. And then I have fire capture if I ever, want to take pictures of the moon or get a wild hair and try planets. So yeah. Different tools for different jobs. Okay. How long does this workshop run? So I guess one good question. We're 3:15.
I put it up for 2 hours, but it's not like it's on a timer. You can go as long as you want.
Okay. Well, I can keep talking about stuff a lot. So if people want to drop, that's fine too.
You might mention plate solving just in case if people are having a hard time finding the target.
Okay. Let me stop sharing because we're not looking at that anyway. Plate solving, sure. Plate solving is when your software will take a picture of whatever you're pointed at and solve, well, actually, more generally, plate solving is taking an image and finding where it is in the night sky. So there's tools out there that do this. ASTAP, ASTAP is the one that I've been using. It's used in these imaging sequence softwares to make sure you're pointed at the right place. So whenever in Nina I slew to a target, it takes I think I have a 1 second exposure, and it figures out where I'm pointed and then adjusts the scope. So it might be off by a good bit or just a little bit, and it'll get it framed exactly where I told it to frame it, or within whatever tolerance has been configured. It's also useful for processing. I know PixInsight does this. I can't speak to other tools like APP, but PixInsight, you can do what's called a photometric color calibration. And if you have to have an astronomical solution, so you have to know where you're pointing in the night sky on what night, but that will then use known stars in the image plus a good color reference to then adjust the colors in the image to be what they should be. Very, very useful. You can also do color calibration by hand, and you probably can get kind of close, or you can make it look whatever way you want it to look. But photometric color calibration is one option. And actually, in PixInsight, you can actually tell it you're doing narrow band and tell it the band passes or the for each of the color channels, or the not the band pass, but you know, whatever your configuration for your filters for the image, which is neat. I haven't used that much. So what else?
Multi-star guiding.
Multi-star guiding, do it. Done.
I'm going to try it tonight. But you know, I was watching YouTube the other day about with multi-star guiding that one of the issues is that you need a guide camera with a wider field, and
Yeah. So with PhD2 multi-star guiding, it can guide on one star. It just uses multi-star if there are other stars to help do a better job of guiding.
You know, when I went using PhD2, when I went from single star to multi-star, I was able to go from 3-minute to 5-minute exposures.
Yep.
It does make a difference once you learn how to use it. I recommend it.
yeah, the ASI Air has it now, and I was going to. I really didn't understand it, and I didn't even know what it was doing when I first saw it, because I went about doing it the way I normally did, with picking one star and say the guide on it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say just click the little box that says do multi-star guiding and let it do its thing.
Yeah.
Now, it'll probably be better.
Well, that's the thing. Do it. Guide with single star with what you're used to. See what your error corrections are like. Then turn on multi-star. If it's no worse, keep it on. If it gets worse, turn it off. One of the things I try to do is get a baseline for any changes that I make. So make sure I understand what I'm starting from. Every time I say, I don't need to do that, it kills me later because I don't have a reference point to know whether I'm doing better or not. And also, while we're talking about this, change as few variables as you can at any point in time. I am working on getting an Esprit 120 setup, which is a much longer focal length than what I've used before. It's heavier. If I do things wrong, it can crash into my tripod, my mount. But there was a week or so ago, I kicked myself for upgrading the software that I use, Nina. I upgraded. They're cutting new betas all the time, and I was like, oh, I'll just stay abreast of, stay up to date. But I couldn't tell if I was having problems because of that software or because of the scope. So try to be methodical in what I change now. I can see they have another update. I just pulled it up. Not sure I'll install that one yet. Yeah, because I'm having issues with filters and halos, and I don't know if it's user error, like did I put the filter in the right way or flipped it around? So
I've always assumed that if you're using a mounted filter, the threads go towards the sensor, right?
I guess mine are unmounted, so I don't know. And when they ship them to you, there's supposed to be like an arrow marking on the side. It's a lie. They're either like what I think even one of them I saw like somebody used the smallest pencil point they could, and it looks like maybe there's something there. So I don't know. I flipped my S2 filter around just before the session, and we'll see tonight, hopefully, if that fixes halos. But I'm changing more variables. I put a different focuser on, so like, I don't know. Could talk like routine, the stuff I do to get set up in a night.
Do you repolar line every night, or
I do. I don't expect things to move, but it's always a little bit different. For a little bit, I got like those anti-vibration pucks that you see under tripod legs. And I think in the summer heat, the weight of the mount, it was moving because it was squishing the whatever goo is inside there, because it's very tacky. I think it was squishing that and causing things to shift just a little bit. So I've gone to without those now. So I was getting some vibrations. I could feel vibrations from my neighbor's AC unit all the way up through to the mount. It was just kind of annoying. But yeah, so every night I polar align, I take all my flats, and I start at like the sun is at -10 degrees. I start imaging around -18. So I have plenty of time to do other stuff. So I do, yeah, polar line, take all my flats, as I mentioned, takes a long time because crazy narrowband filters in my panel right now, it just takes forever. I always check rotation using Nina, and point it somewhere off of north celestial North Pole, somewhere off to the side. Check that everything's rotated properly. I usually I'm shooting now at like 90 degrees. I don't have a automatic rotator, so and then I've started doing forcing PhD calibration every night, because I just want to remove that variable from guiding. Like, did I change something? Don't have to think about it. Just do the calibration. It takes like 3 minutes, and as I mentioned, I've got plenty of time, so it just does it. My tripod's set up in my backyard. I put like 1 foot pavers, set into the ground where the feet rest. Otherwise, it'd be like grass and sand, which is not great. So I think there was a little bit settling over the summer for that to, stop moving. But yeah, I just leave it out in the backyard. I take the telescope off every night, bring it inside, and put one of the 360 covers over top of it. I don't cinch it down because it's so humid here. I put a towel on first and then the cover. If it's rained, I take the towel out and it's wet underneath from condensation forming on the inside of the cover. So I don't leave my scope and camera and everything out. I also leave all my camera gear, everything is attached. I never disconnect anything unless I have to. I'm a little bit crazy with what I have. I have 3 wires coming off the top of the scope bundled together. So there's the power to the mount, USB to the mount. I just removed the hand controller as of yesterday, so I'm very excited about that. And then a DC cable for power in to everything. So DC into a power box advance, and then everything distributes out. Actually, I took a picture of it. I could pull that up. I'm at the point now where I pretty much trust slewing for this setup. So I may stop going outside when it's going to move, but I'm not sure. I'd hate for something to happen. Trying to find my pictures, sorry.
I assume you were referring to the meridian flip when,
Yeah, slewing to a new target or meridian flip. Yeah. Okay, here it is. I brought it inside yesterday to mess around with it. Oh, like this bundle here that's white. It's just a coil that goes around the cables to keep it all tight. And it goes to, there's the 3 cables coming out of it. Power to the mount, USB to the mount, and then DC power, which will run to a whatever power source I'm using. I just hook another cable into it and that all goes up to the top. That's a little better picture there. So a little mini PC on in the front with its antenna, cables bundled up on top. With this mount, I've just been stuffing cables underneath this Losmandy plate, which is nice. I'll have to cinch down everything as much as I did before.
what kind of mini PC is that?
It's a Mele, M-E-L-E. I could get a link if you're interested. It's a low power. Jeez, getting a lot of text. Sorry, trying to shut this phone down. Okay. Yeah, it was less than $300 on Amazon. It's a little bit slow.
You're running Windows or?
Yep,
or-
Windows 10. It's a little bit slow. So I run Windows 10 on it because I like Nina. Nina only runs on Windows. Otherwise, I'd go with something like Fedora or, Linux distro. Yeah, Nina will freeze periodically. It's not too big of a deal. Usually it's still doing what it's supposed to be doing from a sequence perspective, but it just locks up from a user interface, just kind of gets wonky. I have the PowerBox Advanced, this blue box with that's the temperature sensor on top. So all the DC comes in and then gets distributed out, and then this acts as a USB hub. It's also got a dew strap controller, so there's a dew strap on the front. And then the blue box here in the middle now, I just put this on yesterday. It's a Pegasus Astro Focus Cube 2, I guess. Which if you're looking for a focuser, I actually, this thing is nice. It's heavy. I put it on this scope and it is not moving. It doesn't move. It does half steps. So interesting to see if I get better focus with slightly smaller steps.
Does it have a clutch on it? One of the things I don't like about, I have the ZWO focuser is, you basically have to use it to change the focus. You can't manually adjust it. You can they have a little plug-in thing you can plug in with buttons to control it manually, but it'd be nice to be able just to manually focus too.
Yeah, no, this one doesn't. I had the ZWO before. The mounting plate that came with it didn't fit on this particular scope, and I wanted to get another focuser anyway, so I got this one because it comes with mounting plate that works and all the screws that are needed. But yeah, same problem. You can't do it manual anymore. Oh, without loosening the coupler, like the little Allen screws. But yeah, then okay, so moving back, got the flattener for the scope, off-axis guider, filter wheel, and then the camera. So that's my setup right now. I use a lot of gaffer's tape, and I'm using less Velcro now than I used to, but I still use Velcro occasionally. Oh, this reminds me, I need to put some tape on. There's a blue light on the top of this PC that's really annoying. and I put a piece of tape on it flat and then looked at it sideways and it shoots out the side because it's got little ridges. So like, I've got a big piece of tape on this sucker.
Yeah, you had to put tape over the holes in your filter wheel. Also, so did I.
Yep.
That was very poor design on that filter wheel.
Well, it's designed for what I have it set up for now is where I have the camera bolted to the filter wheel and then the off-axis guider bolted to the filter wheel. So yeah, now the holes are covered. But yeah, gaffer's tape is great. Or painter's tape is pretty good. I think painter's tape will, if you leave it on long enough, you'll end up with some kind of residue, but yeah.
Yeah, Naveen, I can show mine if you want the setup.
Yeah.
See if I can do it, if I'm allowed here, we'll see. Is that showing up?
Yes.
All right, this is my main scope, and like I said, I have to put mine on my driveway, so I can't leave it out there. So this whole setup is on one of these wheelie bar things that allows me to roll it out of my garage up to the top of my driveway and set it up there. And I've done it so many times now, I know exactly where to put it. And then I polar align it with a pole master. But so I have a similar thing. There's the power thing. I don't have all my cable management going on this at the moment, so that's why it looks messy. And there's the nice thing I just added to this was the rotator, which makes a huge difference for getting things in the frame exactly the way you want them. So this is a Pegasus Astro rotator, which is very nice. It looks great. It comes along with the same blue box, the same company. And then the guide scope, which is 50 millimeter, and that's a ASI 174 mono camera for the guide camera. And then I put moonlight focusers on all my scopes, just because they're incredibly good at focus, and you can adjust them by hand, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very nice. And this is the ASI 2600 mm and the 36 millimeter filter wheels. And I've gone to 3 nanometer filters now, chroma filters. And so this is the main scope that I use now for most things. And I just leave it like this. I don't change it. I don't take it apart. I don't do anything. I just roll it out and roll it back. And that way things don't change very much when I'm going for flats and darks and things like that. So, but then I realized I had a whole lot of equipment sitting around on shelves that wasn't being used. So I put together another system. But this is the old Atlas that I bought from Chris, and I've sent it off to Arizona to be hypertuned, and I've got it back now. So that's what this is. And then PoleMaster, my Stellar View 70 millimeter scope with a ATIC camera on it and a moonlight focuser and all the usual things. I haven't done any cable management on this yet. I just put it together in the last few days. But I decided that what was sitting around on my shelves was an enormous waste. So, and the area of the sky that I can shoot with this combination is so similar to the other one that I should be able to double my exposures on any given target in a given night for this. And so, and then I run from a laptop rather than a camera or a computer on the scope. But and then my Wi-Fi extends out to where I'm doing, so I can control everything from my desk here, both computers from the desk, and do it that way. And like I said, I stay up all night and do that. So now I'm going to try to have 2 setups going at the same time. If it doesn't drive me crazy, we'll see what happens. But
What's your Steve? What's your other mount?
This is the Atlas Pro, which is okay. That's the Atlas Pro there, and then this is just a regular Atlas. This is the one I bought from Chris, I think 6 years ago, 7 years ago now, something like that. I don't remember, Chris. But then I got the Atlas Pro as well, because this one had stopped working more or less. So that's why I sent it off to Deep Sky Products and have them refurbish it.
Is it the like the bearings or electronics and stuff?
Did
too?
everything on the inside that could be fixed and tested. They did that.
Okay.
And the most expensive part was shipping it out there and shipping it back. Because it's, 40, 45 pounds on
Yeah.
UPS. It's kind of gets expensive. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, every single piece I had here, except for this telescope, are things I wasn't using anymore. And it made no sense to have that. So that's why, I mean, this will still be the main scope, but and I don't have a wheelie on this one yet. So I haven't figured out how to get this out to the top of the driveway without tearing it apart. Because I obviously can't carry it all in one piece. So I'll probably just take the telescope off and carry this part out by hand, but we'll see. Anyway, so that's great. But 7 years ago when I started this, I was camera on a tripod. So it evolves quickly once you get into this.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the rotator you got. 'Cause
Yes.
I've been looking at rotators at the Falcon, and then there's another manufacturer I can't remember now, but like where do you put it in the imaging train? Like do you take flats for every time you rotate? And what kind of recommendations do you have?
Well, if I'm obviously rotate to a single target in a night, and then I don't rotate anymore during that night. So yeah, so I will take flats with the rotator in that position.
Okay.
And then if the next night, if I rotate it, then probably I'll take flats again, simply because the dust could move if I have any dust, that sort of thing. And in the imaging train, it's the camera and the spacers. Well, in this case, the camera is right on the filter wheel, and then the rotator is right on the other side of the filter wheel. And then any spacers I need between that and any focal reducer that I might have is after that. And so I play with the spacing from the focal reducer to the rotator and do that. So
Yeah. Okay.
I don't change much of anything. Don't change, it's all tight night to night. Then usually I don't have too much of a problem with focus or anything like that. But adding the rotator was a big help.
Yeah, I tend to go to a bunch of targets because I have, obstructions, house roof and stuff like that, and trees that get in the way. And I've really wanted to be able to frame things up. 'Cause right now I just run at one angle and let it sit. And I'm like, well, that's what I get. But
I tore 3 trees down. So
the trees that are near my backyard are not mine. So
that's the one that's in one side yard belongs to a neighbor, and I tried to get him to take it down, but he wouldn't. I took all the ones in my yard down that were in the way, and so now I get at least 2 or 3 hours more per night of targets typically. So it's not very ecological, but at this point I didn't care.
yeah, so I've thought about putting if it's possible to put the rotator before the flattener. But I think it has to be wide enough, probably not to impact the image circle, which means it's the Prima Loose Labs. They have an Arco 3-inch rotator.
Maybe.
But then finding adapters to try and go from one thing to another to get is, I mean, there's custom builds. I'd probably have to send an email and be like, hey, I can't make your software on your site do what I want it to do. Make me this thing. But at that point, like this rotator I'm looking at now, it's $1,400. Add in a focuser of the one I just got is something like, we'll say 250. That's getting up there, and you're getting into the Nightcrawler range. Like, might as well. Like, how much further does it do?
If I didn't have the Moonlight now, and I wanted a rotator, I would probably get the Nightcrawler and just combine them. But
Yeah.
I've already got the Moonlights on them, so I'm not going to go that direction.
Oh, and for context for other people, Nightcrawlers are made by Moonlight. I think they're 2.5-inch focuser / rotator starts at something like $2,500. It's up there. which is why I'm just looking at these things right now and not buying something.
Still cheaper than the 2600 mm.
True. Yeah. Well, especially the filters you got. I mean, wow.
Steve's mention of spacers got me wondering, did you cover back focus for people who are new?
Did not cover back focus. That is great. So back focus is the distance required between a field flattener or reducer or coma corrector for a Newtonian to the sensor in your camera. Typical back focus is 55 millimeters, which works out great for a DSLR. You get a T-ring adapter, which is, it screws onto your flattener, coma corrector, reducer, and then you just click your DSLR into it, and that's 55 millimeters. Done. It's very important to get your back focus right. Filters, if you have a filter, a light pollution filter, narrowband, broadband, if you're doing something like a L Extreme, dual band filter for a color camera, filters impact your back focus. At least they do. People say on paper they do at least. You take basically the thickness of your filter divided by 3, and that's what you should add. So I've got 2 millimeter filters, so I should add 2/3 of a millimeter. Now, I don't know that it matters that much. I'd had all sorts of other problems with my previous rig that I don't think the back focus was the main problem. I'm still tweaking stuff with the Esprit. I think I've got a small amount of tilt, so tonight I'm hoping to do some tests with camera rotations and doing, pointing east versus pointing west and then comparing images. So I don't know. I want to get rid of the tilt first because it's what I see is instead of a nice round star, I see a star with a slight haze off on one side, and it's consistent across the entire field. Zoomed out, it looks fine. Zoomed in, it annoys me. So I pixel peep on my own images. So I bought some spacers that would go in, and on my old Zenith star, I put it in, and the field is just not flat. So I couldn't tell if it was making it worse or better. I had tilt from the focuser itself, and just wasn't quite well for the sensor size that I have, which is APS-C. It wasn't. I just wasn't gonna get things nailed down. But yeah, back focus is important. And it's not always 55 millimeters, so read up on what it is. And it's not per scope, it's per flattener, reducer, coma corrector.
Yeah, if you have a ZWO's website has pages that show you how to put things together exactly in terms of spacing. Generally speaking, depending on what flatteners you have and that kind of thing. So that's how I figured out where to put my rotator into this line of optics, was going to their site and figuring out just exactly where things could go, in what order, that kind of thing. So most of the camera websites will have some pages that show you how to do the back focus. And then you take pictures, and if you see that your stars are weird looking in the corners, then you know your back focus is wrong and you have to play around with spacers. So, but you kind of don't know that until you've actually done it. Because there can be strange things like Naveen says, there's also tilt problems, which I find much harder to deal with. So
yeah. I just put in chat, this is something I found, and there's other references as well, but if you're seeing elongation of your stars, what it means from a back focus perspective. So if they're radiating outwards, let me share my screen, or get on the recording too. Yeah, so the top picture, if you're seeing elongation away from the center of the frame, you're too close, which means you need to move out. And then if you're too far out, you'll see them stretched like, not circle, but like around the center. What I was seeing with my previous rig was closer to this top one, but it was not consistent across the field. So like the right side of the frame looked pretty good. The bottom left looked pretty bad. So I had tilt also in the mix. So
when I added my rotator, my spacing changed just a tiny bit, so between my field flattener and the rotator. So I had to get these little spacers that were just exactly right for the field flattener and the rotator. And you can buy these online; they're a couple bucks. So that's the kind of thing you might have to have in your toolkit.
Yep. Yeah, the other, I mean, if it's not obvious, this is one, not a cheap hobby if you go in pretty far, and two, it's not an easy hobby because you've got hardware issues on top of the environment, and then the processing. It's just like, yeah.
And as you indicated, disk space.
Yeah. There's problems in all the places. Thankfully, I like the problems. I enjoy trying to solve the problems. I felt like I'd gotten almost all the problems ironed out with my previous rig, and it was like, what now? Taking some pictures, they're great, but I really enjoy trying to figure out what's
Processing has
going
been
on.
the most frustrating thing for me is, I've gotten a point where I could tell that, I've got good subs. I feel like I've kind of conquered the capture part, but I still get frustrated at, I don't feel like I'm getting the final result out of what I think is pretty good data.
Yeah, it can be frustrating. You could ask for specific help or general help, of course.
If you're willing to share your data and put it someplace.
Yeah.
What I figured out is I kind of, I was start off, I would just copy other people's routines. Like I go watch some YouTube and, says, well, here's what, somebody what I like to do. And that, I would just mimic that, not really knowing what I was doing. And I've started doing the atom block courses, and they can feel a little tedious, but one of the things that's really good about his courses is he does explain why you do certain things and what's going on. And that's really helped. Like, spending the time to watch the way to batch pre-processing videos. And like Naveen says, his explanation of, what the different types of subs are doing, how they are applied, that, kind of made a lot of things click, at least on, on the pre-processing. So now I'm getting into his stuff on post-processing and, like learning deconvolution and really trying to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, the problem with the processing side is there's so many different ways you can do stuff, different tools. I mean, like you're doing PixInsight if you're following atom block stuff, but yeah, I take physical written notes whenever I'm doing stuff so I can go back and reference it. And then it's like because then I'll get to the point where I don't know what I've done because I've tried too many things. So I'm like, these are the steps I'm going to do to try out different variations and, just methodically work through stuff. And then I have to remind myself later when I'm using it that worked for that image. It might not work for every image. So yeah, maddening.
Pre-COVID, we used to have Saturday little in-person workshops, which helped a lot, but we haven't done that in years now. So,
Like image processing workshops.
yeah. Well, it was before your time, even.
Yeah. Wonder if we could do something virtual because that'd be.
Probably can. Yeah, but where people would come in with their data and say, "I'm trying to do this with this data," and people could sit there and say, well, try this, try that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun. But we lost the place that we were doing that, the little restaurant in Raleigh where we were doing it. We couldn't do it anymore because they took the tables and chairs away in the hallway outside. So we probably do it on Zoom. Yeah.
Well,
that could be fun.
If things subside as far as real world things, we could always go back and do what Michael Fulbright did a while back with workshops over at Centennial Campus. Mike Mantini's still there, so I know he could hook us up with a room on the weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's always nice to do things in person, and that way, if somebody has a question after doing the actual workshop, whoever has experience, we can come by and, guide them. And but at the same time, like you're saying, we could always do that virtually, at the same time.
Yeah. Now I'll put it out there as like I enjoy the times that I've had an opportunity to look at somebody's data and try and help them realize whatever it is they're trying to do. I'm just, it's fun to try, it's a new challenge, a new problem to solve because it's a different setup. You get the masters, of course, unless you've specifically been asking for the raws, which it's a lot of data, but sometimes it's worth it. But then, yeah, like can I do something with what they've given me? And sometimes it's pretty bad what they give you, but it's okay. It's what they've got. I started off with what I would now call pretty bad stuff, but I'm really happy with what I started with. I still look back at it and smile. So.
Yeah, very good. Okay. I don't know, is that it for us here?
I think we're close to 4 o'clock Eastern, so
yeah.
We should probably wrap it.
I mean, if anybody else has any questions about this, I think this is, decent as far as being thorough. I mean, yeah, I think it's more than enough for anybody to wrap their head around how we do what we do. And what I'm getting at is just if you have any further questions, you can either come at regular imaging meeting or just ask for it on the Groups IO or on the email list. So, but yeah, thank you so much, Naveen. Yeah, we're kind of overdue for something like this.
No problem. Thanks, everyone. Fun
Thank
talk.
you.